Okay, so welcome to my personal revision guide on tooth morphology. This is the first in a series of presentations that I'm going to be moving on to my next slide, which is a disclaimer. So I have created this as part of my own revision, so the content is not the opinion of the university that I'm studying at or any of the lecturers. This is my adaptation of the information. It's designed for me to understand it in my own way, but you can also use it if you find it useful. Some of the information may have been interpreted incorrectly by myself, and you should always check any information with other sources. All content contained in this presentation is either free of copyright or permission has been requested for use. So please do not duplicate, as these permissions do not extend to further copying. So just to kind of sum that up, this basically means that this is just my information and it's for my own revision. But if you do find it useful to help you remember stuff, then that's excellent. So why is tooth morphology important? Well, the reason that tooth morphology is important is to be able to understand how to restore teeth accurately. As dentists, going to be a major part of our role is to create teeth that function and fit into the occlusion correctly, and in order to do so, we need them to be correct morphologically, so we need to be able to do that. It's possible that we might need to identify teeth if they've become avulsed. The majority of that situation is usually pathology and looking at forensic dentistry, but occasionally you might get someone who's come in having lost a number of anterior teeth, for example, in an accident that we're looking to replace and to put back into the oral cavity, and it's important that we don't put these back into the wrong place. So we need to know exactly who we're looking at and what we're looking at, and also so that when we're charting, we can recognise missing and present teeth in the dental arch accurately, and we can make an accurate record of people's occlusion. So which teeth should we have in the mouth, or do we have in the mouth? Well, most of the time there are 20 teeth in the full deciduous dentition and then 32 in the full permanent dentition. However, this is not necessarily always the case. Sometimes you have cases such as anodontia or hypodontia, where you might have extra teeth, or you might have small teeth, or you might have less teeth. So this is it's not really 100% accurate, but it's in the most part what we would refer to as being a full set of teeth would be 32 adult teeth. So in order to understand morphology, the first thing that we need to look at is the terms that we use to describe these features. So this is my little mouth that I've created here, and as you can see, we've split the mouth into what we call quadrants, and you've got the midline, which is the line that runs through the centre of the two middle teeth, and this actually runs all the way through our body, the midline. It's a recurring terminology that you will get to use. So in the middle is the midline, and always remember that, because middle, midline, and then the midline splits the mouth into the right and the left side. Now this will always appear to be the wrong way round, because when we're looking at our patient is facing us. We can't do dentistry through the back of their skull, and we have to do it through the oral cavity, so that means that they're going to be looking at us. So when they're looking at us, that means that we're looking in a diagonal cross to them. So their right would be our left, and their left would be our right. But it's quite easy to just, once you get used to it, to get that into your head. So the first thing that we're going to look at is what teeth do we actually have in the mouth. And the first tooth that we've got is a central incisor. We've got two central incisors. We've got the two central incisors up here, and we've got the two central incisors down here at the bottom. And so we've got the upper and the lower. So these quadrants are split into the upper and lower. Then we've got the lateral incisors, which is the two incisors next to the central incisors. The canine teeth, which are usually sometimes referred to as the cornerstone of the mouth. We've got two premolars, and we've got three molars. So that would be the teeth that we've got, and they repeat. So on the left, we would have the left central incisor, the left lateral incisor, the left canine, the left premolars, and the left molars. And we're numbering these as we go from 1 here round to 8 So the numbers are always going from the midline away to the posterior. Okay, I managed to achieve down there, but anyway. So they're the teeth that we have. And so what we also need to know is how we're going to describe the surfaces of the teeth, because we've got quite a few surfaces of the teeth. So we've got, sorry, I split this into the upper maxillary and the lower mandibular, because the upper is formed from the maxilla and the lower are formed from the mandible. So the first surface to get used to is the buccal surface and the labial surface. So these surfaces are the outside of the teeth, and we call them buccal when they're closest to the cheek, and we call them labial when they're closest to the lips. So the front three teeth have labial surfaces, and the posterior teeth have buccal surfaces. And that's repeated on the upper, the lower, the left, and the right. And then on the inside of the teeth, we call these, in the upper arch, we call these palatal, and they're palatal because they're against the palatal arch. And in the lower teeth, we call them lingual, and they're lingual because they're next to the tongue. And when we're referring to the tongue, we're referring to the lingual aspects. So that's closest to the tongue. So that's most of the surfaces. We've got the labial or the buccal, which is the outside, and we've got the palatal or the lingual, which is the inside of the surface of the tooth. But there's another surface that's quite important, and that's the occlusal surface, which is the biting surface of the tooth. So on the posterior teeth we have occlusal surfaces, and then on the anterior teeth we've got incisal surfaces. And we have incisal surfaces because these surfaces are more like a singular ridge in the centre that's used for tearing, whereas the occlusal surface is used for biting at the back. So just a couple more surfaces that we've got, and these are the surfaces that denote the sides of the teeth. And the first side is the mesial side, and this is repeated on each tooth here. So we see here this is the mesial side because it is the surface of the tooth that is closest on that tooth to the midline. So this would be the mesial surfaces. You can see me drawing with my pen here, a little bit dodgily, but they're on this side here. So these are the mesial surfaces of the teeth here. So all of the sides of the teeth that, when in the mouth, are closest to the midline are denoted as the mesial. Now these are labelled as per how the tooth should be in the mouth. So if the tooth is rotated, then the mesial surface might be facing a different direction. For example, if it was a complete 90-degree rotation, you might have a mesial surface placed buccally. And that means that it's rotated all the way round, but it would still be the mesial surface because we label the teeth how they would be in an average dentition. And then the same thing happens to the distal surfaces. The distal surfaces are on the backs of the teeth, and I'll show this down here so it doesn't get so confusing. So these would be the distal surfaces because these are the teeth furthest away from the midline. So they are more distally placed. These are the distal edges. So that's the majority of the terminology that you need to do. It's just practice, to be honest. The more you practice with these terms, the more that they'll just become a second language to you and they'll become interchangeable. A really good way to practice this is to practice your charting. The more you can practice your charting, the easier this will become. So just looking at a couple more terms that we have surrounding some of the teeth. So the top of the teeth here, which you can see as the crown of the tooth. So this whole area up here, that's the crown of the tooth. And the crown of the tooth refers to everything that is above the gum level. So the everything above gum level really is the crown of the tooth, and everything below the gum level, this is the root of the tooth. So all of this down here, that's the root of the tooth. Obviously there can be some changes to this, but in the most part that would be the defining feature. Some of the edge of the crown will usually sit just under the gingival sulcus, but in the most part that's the easiest differentiator. On each of the teeth you've got these cusps, so more pronounced on the posterior teeth, but you do still get some some cusps on some of the more anterior teeth, and these are just basically the bulges that you see in the crowns that form the distinctive shapes. At the bottom of the root you have the apex, and the apex, anytime you see this word apex, what that usually means is a hole. So you have, at the bottom of the teeth, you have a small hole down here, and that's where all of the nerves and the blood supply enter the base of the tooth. So there's a small hole there, and that's usually at the end, and it's called the apex of the tooth. So refer to this here. If we're talking about something moving this way, so if something was to say go this direction, then we would say that that is more apical. If something was this direction, we'd say it was more cervical or more coronal. There are different terms that can be used depending on whereabouts you're discussing, but that's kind of like the basics. And then here, just in the centre, the gap between the crown and the root of the tooth is called the cervical line, or the amelodentinal junction. And the reason for that is this is usually the point where the enamel gives way for cementum at the bottom of the tooth. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run you through some revision pointers on all of the different teeth that we have in the mouth. So starting with the upper central incisors, I'm working all the way down to the lower third molars. So with the upper central incisors here, what we're looking at is a crown that's often as wide as it is long. So we've kind of got this almost square shape that's happening here, a little bit, maybe a bit more rectangular, but the crown itself is quite kind of squared off. The labial surface here, you can see this here. This is often these terms are often sometimes interchangeable with lingual and palatal. It's just the drawings that I got permission for use the lingual term. That's fine. So the labial surface is slightly convex, whereas the palatal surface is slightly concave. And where the palatal surface is slightly concave, you get this area here called a cingulum, which is a little bulge on the palatal or lingual aspect of the tooth, and that's caused from the concaveness of the tooth, and then that leads to the cingulum on the outside there. The mesio-incisal angle is sharp. This is a sharp angle here, whereas this tends to be more fluid. So you can work out whether your tooth is left or right. You're looking for this sharp edge and making sure that you've got your cingulum, so that your cingulum is on the palatal surface. Another really easy way to find that is that I refer to this as the curve of the tooth, but it's really the amelocemental junction. This line here that we've got here. We look, the drawings are not brilliant, not actually brilliant for this, but what you can see, if I draw a really dodgy line across here, is that the mesial edge has a bigger dip than the distal edge does. My drawing has not done that justice, and I apologise for that previously. This is the easiest way. If you're not really too sure which way round the tooth is going to go, you're looking for this this curve in the enamel-cemental junction, and we're looking for that curve to be higher or more coronal than the distal. So we're looking for this point to become more coronal and this bigger dip that we will have there. When we look at the lower central incisor, we can see that this crown is more wedge-shaped and it inclines lingually. These edges are more symmetrical. You notice that our square shape has gone, and this is now definitely much longer, definitely more rectangular. The edges are almost symmetrical. As you can see here, this edge is just slightly rounder than this edge, this corner here. So we're looking at our distal being slightly rounder. There is a small cingulum, see here, small cingulum, but if you look at the pictures here, you can definitely see that the mesial edge ridge here is much greater than the distal. And that's what you're looking for to really help you to get your mesial and your distal. So you're looking for this edge on the mesial edge to be a much bigger curve. And that's the lower central incisors. So they're quite easy to distinguish between the upper and the lower. When you get the laterals, they can start being a little bit more challenging, because the laterals are like almost baby versions of the central incisors, and so that can make it very difficult to tell the difference, especially if you're presented with a tooth out of the mouth. If you're presented with them in the arch and you're trying to establish them, it is actually easier, because normally they'll go central lateral, although sometimes teeth do end up being swapped around, and that's always quite interesting to see. But in the most part, it's easier to distinguish them. But you need to be able to have a look, because you imagine if someone came out with all 4 teeth out of the arch, we need to get them reimplanted the correct way round. So we need to get this right. So here the crown is much thinner than the central. The cervical margin here is narrowed medially. So I don't know if you can see it too well on this picture here, but do you see how this comes in? It comes in here. That's because it's narrowing medially, and so that's what that means here. So it's narrowing medially here. The mesio-incisal angle, this is still sharp. The distal incisal edge is still rounded, so that doesn't really tell you whether it's a central or a lateral, which is not really very helpful to you. But what you're looking here is you've got 2 distinct marginal ridges. So you've got two ridges here. You can see the shading here on the diagram in the middle. That's because you usually get quite a large deep fossa there, and that's really prone to caries. So you will often find that teeth have been restored here, because where the cingulum is not so pronounced, it's the 2 fossa that are crossing over, and it's where those 2 deep fossa meet in the centre that you get this edge that's prone to caries. Again, your medial edge has a greater curve than the distal when you're looking at the signs here. So this curve is much greater than this curve. So this is always our winners for mesial and distal. So we can always work this out using these curves. When we look at the lower lateral incisor, what we refer to is that the crown is appearing a fan shape. So I kind of dodgily draw a really odd fan. So this would be our fan shape. It's kind of like an odd trapezoidal, but this is a useful term to remember because it's referred to quite regularly. We've still got a nice sharp mesio-incisal angle, and the curve is bigger medially. So again here, this is our mesial curve and our distal curve, and so our mesial curve is much greater. When we look at this picture is not really the best way to see this, but you'll see kind of like the root kind of appears when we're looking incisally at it, and this mesiodistal edge tends to appear twisted. So here it looks really straight on. It would probably not quite look quite so straight. It would be more twisted, and that's quite a good indicator that we're looking at a lower lateral incisor rather than a lower central incisor, because the lower central incisors don't tend to have that twist in the incisal edge when you're looking down at them. So moving on to the canines, I mean, this is revision, so it's just a whistle stop for the through. Looking onto the upper canines, they've got a pointed cusp now rather than a flat edge. So notice that we've moved from incisal edge to the word cusp. So we've now moved on to our cusp teeth, and all of the rest of the teeth going back through the arch will have a cusp. So now we have one cusp, and so this pointed cusp at the end. When we're looking at our cusp, we're looking at the mesial edge and the distal edge. So this is a mesial edge, and this is a distal edge. So you notice if we're going to take a line from the point, that the mesial edge is shorter, and that the distal edge actually rounds off, because before we've got, oh, see this point here, we've got all of this gap in the middle, so it's actually rounded off before it's changed its direction. So the distal edge is much more rounded. It's nice, you can see it here, nice and rounded, and then the medial edge is much shorter. The distal curve is also a little bit flatter. So just remember this angle here, and it will help you. Once we've got here, we do struggle a little bit with our mesial and our distal sides here because they are very, very similar. The best way is we're looking for this mesial cusp edge and this distal cusp edge for the differences to work out which way round these teeth are going to be going. When you look at the lower canine, we've still got this cusp, but it's not quite as sharp. But we've still got a short mesial edge, long curvy distal edge. So we've definitely got two distinct edges that we've got. The root here not as long, and we'll often get these little bends in the end. We have smooth lateral surface. I don't know why I didn't mean lateral surface. I mean lingual surface. I'm writing, losing the plot. You see, this is much smoother. We don't really have those deep ridges, and we don't really have those deep fosses that we've seen in the other teeth. So we know that this must be a canine because it's quite smooth, and we don't have those big ridges that we have on some of the centrals and lateral incisors. So we know we've definitely got a canine, and so once you know you've got your canine, you're looking for short mesial, long distal edge. And that's going to get you the right way around. With our upper first premolars, these are probably the most challenging teeth. Always managed to get myself all muddled up with these, but you get used to them. So you've got two cusps here now. So you've got a front buccal cusp and a distal cusp. Buccal cusp and a lingual cusp, sorry. So you can see here that you've got just one cusp if we're looking up here, whereas here you see you've got two cusps there. So the lingual cusp is always lower and narrower than the buccal cusp. So you should always be able to get it right to buccal and lingual. What you're looking for is this canine fossa on the mesial edge. This is a groove where the corner of the canine fits into that groove in the occlusion. So we're looking for this canine fossa. And it uses clue because it's called the canine fossa, the hole for the canine. That's basically what that means in Latin. You also have a really good groove. I don't know if you can see it on the drawing so well, but just here you'll see that there's like a little groove. There's usually a well-defined mesial marginal groove. And the lingual cusp, if you can see on the diagram here, this is mesially placed. Over 50% of these teeth have two roots. Roots are challenging because they change. So there are like standard root amounts, but they do change. This is usually referred to as having two roots because the majority of them do, but not always. Sometimes they're fused. So that's the upper first premolar. If we look at the upper second premolar, now we've definitely got one root because most of the time these are fused. Both of our cusps are a similar size, so we're then looking, right, okay, now our cusps are similar, then I'm looking at my second premolar rather than my first premolar. The mesial crown is quite convex, quite bulky, and the distal root depression. So you see here on this tooth, you've kind of got like a depression here. That's quite marked on the distal edge. It's really going to be what's going to tell you that that's your distal edge of the tooth. You can see here from the occlusal, it's just a very, very balanced, rounded tooth. This distal ridge, root depression, is going to really be what's going to help tell you which is the mesial and which is the distal. So you have to get used to that with your second premolar. If we look at our lower first premolar, we've gone back to having this buccal cusp and this lingual cusp, with the buccal cusp being much higher and much more marked than the distal cusp. And in fact, you can see lingual cusp. Let's stop calling it the distal cusp. What's distal cusp at all? You can see here that it's almost not really a cusp at all. It's almost like a shelf or a ledge, and sometimes it really can appear like that. It's displaced distally, so this to here you can see this is displaced distally. So lingual cusp is displaced distally, and there is a small groove from the mesial pit. So you see here, this is the mesial pit, a small groove that's coming through on the mesial side there. The distal ridge is also much lower than the mesial ridge. So this is the distal ridge. Down here. Right way around. Oh yeah. Ignore me. I'm having moments of blondness. So you can look at the ridges and you can look for this small groove in the medial pit, and also that your lingual cusp is going to be displaced distally. That's what you're looking for. With your lower second premolar, very similar in appearance, but it's got a much larger crown than the lingual cusp has. The distal fossa is much larger than the mesial fossa now, so you can see like we've definitely got a much larger fossa going on in here. Sometimes you'll have two lingual cusps, and if you do, the mesial is going to be much larger. We've got equal ridges now, although these drawings are not that easy to demonstrate that. You have got equal ridges. So this is really difficult, really not so easy to get your mesial and your distal on. And so we're really going to be looking at our fossas here. So with our distal fossa being larger, and with our lingual cusp. You see here, this is our lingual cusp, and you notice that is mesial to the midline. And so if you did have a distal cusp, it would be very small, whereas this is more like an edge. So that's what you're kind of looking for here, is does this have a lingual cusp? It might have two. If it has two, then the mesial is going to be the larger, and it's going to be mesially placed, and that's going to help you get those the correct way round. So moving on to the molars, upper first molar, this is one of the easier tooths to identify. It's got three roots, so this is really three distinct roots. So this is really one of the largest teeth that we have in the mouth. Very often, oh, I drew a big circle. Very often, it's got this cusp, which is our tubercle of Carabelli, or our cusp of Carabelli, whichever is absolutely fine. And that's on this mesiopalatal cusp just down here. So this is our mesiopalatal cusp. It's the biggest cusp that we have. And then we have our occlusal ridge that goes across this direction. Our fissure pattern is H-shaped, but I've drawn all of this so you can see that so well. So H-shaped fissure pattern, really easy. What we're looking for, this is the mesiopalatal cusp. Once you've got your mesiopalatal cusp, you can rotate this tooth in the mouth to your heart's content. So that's really what you're looking for. You can use the roots. You've got two buccal and one lingual, or one palatal. So you can use those to get it the right way around as well. But mesiopalatal cusp is the largest, and usually considerably. So that's what you're first looking for. With the upper second molar, you can see that we do normally have still three roots, but you see they're much closer together. They're not divergent, and sometimes they fuse a little bit. This is a much more triangle shape now, rather than that large trapezoidal shape. We won't have a tubercle on this one, so we won't have a cusp of Carabelli. So if you have a cusp of Carabelli, it's not a second molar. It's got to be a first molar. Ways that we can find out whether this is mesial or distal. You're going to be looking at your roots, because again, you're going to have 2 buccal roots. You're going to have 1 palatal root. So once you have the tooth rotated the correct way round, you're going to know that this is an upper rotated the right way round. You're going to know which is mesial and distal. Much harder when you're trying to describe it, but much easier to do when you have the tooth in front of you. But if you get the roots the right way round, your tooth's going to be the right way round, if that makes sense. And then, is it going to be left or right? Well, you've got your bulk, your main cusps are on the buccal, and again your mesiopalatal cusp is still your largest cusp. But you're looking is definitely much smaller and doesn't have a tubercle. The upper third molar is much difficult. Notice that I've had to change the drawings up on here because they are not as easy to come by, and that's because, to be honest, the morphology of the third molar changes so regularly. They just come through how they come through. Some of them come through looking like lovely 7s, some of them come through looking like lovely 6s, some of them come through looking like blobs of nothing. So they really can absolutely change. There are 3 cusps. So you've got your 2 buccal cusps and you've got your singular palatal cusp or lingual cusp. The roots are usually fused. Sometimes they're fused into just one big root. Often irregular. It's quite hard to, when it's out of the mouth, it's quite easy to see it, and it just doesn't quite, normally they just don't look quite fully formed. That's the easiest way to think about it when you're comparing it to the others. So we go down to our lower first molar. This tooth has got 5 cusps. It is the only tooth in the mouth that has 5 cusps. It's got 3 buccal cusps. 1, 2, 3. See them up here. 1, 2, 3. And it's got 2 lingual cusps just on the inside here. There is deep fissures and pits on the occlusal. This is a highly carious tooth, just because it's so difficult to clean. The distal cusp here makes the distal edge rounder. So if you're looking at these edges here, this is rounder and this is rounder than the mesial edges, and that's because of the extra cusps on that side. And the distal cusp is always quite small, and the other 2 cusps are definitely more buccally and lingually placed. You've got 2 roots, mesial and distal. The mesial root is curved and broader than the distal, so you will often see just about, if you look down the edge here, that there are 2 roots here, but from the mesial you can't see any of the distal because it's wider. The buccal pit, you see here, there's like the buccal pit is doing all sorts of interesting things. There's a little buccal pit here. That is highly prone to caries. So if you're asked about that, you've got a little buccal surface pit that's prone to caries. That's always going to be your lower first molar. Okay, so lower second molar is much more symmetrical. We've got this kind of circular ball square shape. We've got 4 cusps. We have a cross. Oh, my drawing is falling tonight. We have a cross. That is our fissure pattern. The lingual cusps are the highest. So you see here the lingual cusps are higher than the palatal cusps, the buccal cusps, with the mesio-buccal cusp being the largest. That's that one there. The roots are less divergent, but the mesial root is still the broadest. That means it's the widest from there to there. It's wider than the distal. So we haven't got 5, we've only got 4. So 4 cusps, 2 roots, occlusal surface, lower second molar, we've got a large, and the mesiobuccal cusp is the largest, and the mesial root is the broadest. And just to finish off, the lower third molar, variable in shape and size, very much like the upper molar, can come in all shapes and forms. Roots are often fused, variety of cusps. It's stuck in at the back. It's always interesting little tooth. It doesn't have the distinction that the other teeth do, so it would be very difficult to tell whether it was a left or right if you just had it in isolation. Sometimes you get this kind of distally leaning curve in the roots, but not always. But that can be helpful. With the third molars, you would really be guessing as to which way round it went. But hopefully you won't have to be trying to place too many third molars directly into the mouth examination. So focus on the others, and that will lead you through. Okay, so thank you for revising with me. Good luck in your future learning. I hope you found this useful, even though I know that I ramble. But if it's useful, it's useful. If it's not, then at least it's helped me try and get things in my head. Okay, bye.